let's move on to the main story of the day, which is yesterday's King's speech. Now, not for the first time, he's given a speech before, but this is the first time he's made it on his own behalf. The first time in 70 years has been a speech by the King to open Parliament. And it's had a bit of a thumbs down for being rubbish, hasn't it, John? The sense that Rishi Sunak has kind of given up, not really bothered to lay much legislation before the House in its final term before there is going to have to be a general election.
Yeah, and you look at the polls at the moment, and the Labour Party about 20 points ahead of the Tories. And we know that there'll probably be an election at some point during the next year. So, yeah, there is a bit of time, but there's not loads of time for Rishi Sunak to manage to turn things round. And so he really does need to take one of these opportunities to really turn the dial. And so we had Conservative Party conference last month, and that was a bit, there wasn't particularly great. We had all those rows over HS2, and it didn't really seem like they were on the front foot with many things. There weren't any particularly great ideas. The only one that will make a big difference was that changing the rules on smoking, and that suggestion that they might fiddle around with A levels in 10 years' time. And so that wasn't a big change moment. Yesterday, when we had the King's speech, and yeah, it is King Charles who delivered it, but it's basically him reading out a list of laws that the government wants to pass between now and the next election. And it was just quite underwhelming. There wasn't really any big things in there you think that would change any people's minds about whether they're voting Tory or Labour. I mean, there was legislation in there to put the smoking stuff into effect. If you look through the documents, there's a suggestion that they might impose a tax on vaping, so to discourage people who don't smoke at all from taking up vaping, particularly children. I mean, that's possibly a sensible thing to do, but I'm not sure it's really going to win you any votes. And I just think at some point the Tories are going to have to come up with something. We have got the autumn statement later this month. That will be when they set out their tax and spending plans. There's loads of Tory MPs who just say, yes, just cut taxes. That will be how you get voters back on board. It doesn't sound like they're going to do that. But if the Tories want to win the election, they have to offer something to the country to vote for.
Yeah, Philip says, I think he's talking about King Charles, looks all right divvy in that crown. Don't hear the word divvy often enough. It's time to abolish the monarchy. It's so outdated. I'm glad you said that, Philip, because something amazing happened in that speech. Something absolutely astonishing, which you wouldn't get from a politician. And what it was that the fact that it's an environmentalist king, a vocal supporter of green issues his entire life, all right? He drives an Aston Martin that runs on cooking oil, for example. Paid to have it diverted. It's still an Aston, of course, but he's been vocally noisy, I should say, about environmental issues the entirety of the time he was Prince of Wales. And yesterday he sat on a gold throne in that silly hat and calmly read out a speech saying that his government was going to drill for more oil in the North Sea. And you know what? He didn't even flicker an eyelid. There was no sense at all that he didn't like that. And that is a wonderful advert for a constitutional monarchy. And it's something which I think no politician who's been vocal about green issues, for example, and then becomes an elected head of state would ever be able to do. And it's perhaps something that some of our cousins across the seas who can learn about having a puppet head of state, they're quite useful. Obviously, you need to threaten to chop their heads off before they start behaving themselves. But it's quite useful when you've got one. Jim says it's a bit creepy seeing Charlie dressed up in his mum's gear. It's not just his mum's gear, it's his granddad's, it's his great-granddad's, it's his great-great-granddad's, it's great-great... You know where I'm going. It's always been a bit creepy. Now, but there doesn't seem to have been, in this speech, John, much of a mention of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges, which was how he was going to try to get re-elected, wasn't it? He's going to bring down inflation, bring down NHS waiting lists, reduce the number of small boats coming across the channel, grow the economy, and one other thing that no one can remember. Were they in the speech and we just didn't notice it?
So there were bits in, so when King Charles, as well as reading out this list of laws, there was also a bit of language around it. So there was mention about how the government's trying to bring down inflation. There might have been a mention of stop the boats in there somewhere. I can't quite remember. But you have heard a bit less from the government about these 5 pledges as we get towards the end of the year. There was one point where they emblazoned them on everything. Every email that political reporters got from a government press officer had the 5 pledges slapped across the top. And we know that some of them are going a bit better than others. So he obviously set the 5 pledges out in January at the start of the year. The idea was that he would be getting on quite well with them by the end of the year. And inflation has come down, although prices are still obviously high. It just means the rate at which prices increases is not going up as much as it was, but still people are paying loads in the shops. So that has come down quite significantly. But the numbers crossing the channel in small boats has come down, but it's definitely not been stopped. There are still significant numbers risking their lives making those journeys. But you look at some of the other ones in the 5 pledges, so particularly bringing down NHS waiting lists, they are not coming down. They are going up and up and up. I can't remember what the latest figure is. I think it's about 7.8 million people.
Oh, it's a billion
waiting lists.
Billions, zillions. That's what it is.
So, yeah, I think that is why possibly the government have stopped going on about all 5 pledges, because on a lot of them, they're not doing particularly well. Also, one of them is bringing down national debt. That's not coming down. We're still borrowing loads of money. That's going up. What's the other one? There's a 5th one.
It's growing the economy, bringing down the debt.
Growing the economy. Well, that's the other one. And that's obviously, we are seeing some growth, but it's pretty anemic. It's like 0.1% or something. So
yeah, exactly.
It's quite a mixed bag on those 5 pledges.
Yeah. And what do you think, everybody? How do you feel about the King's speech yesterday? Do you think it was worth all the rigmarole and folderol, or was it a bit of a damp squib for you? Was it something in there which was important? There were a lot of crime and justice measures. It does look like perhaps the Tory government is gearing up to campaign on tough law and order. There's even a suggestion they found someone to try. They've deputed someone to go and hunt through Keir Starmer's time as DPP, as Director of Public Prosecutions, to see if there's any dirt on him. I think if there was any dirt, someone would have found it by now, but still. Mike says that Sunak's introduction to the King's speech said he promised integrity, professionalism and accountability, and that he's delivered it. What planet is he living on? Probably the same one where the meteors are resting and not striking the I'm a Celeb jungle, Mike, I would suggest. Rachel says Rishi's pledges that he can meet: rename Snickers to Marathon, bring back Spangles, introduce tartan paint, rubber tin tax introduction, and make space hoppers more bouncy. I think those may be from the Monster Raving Loony Party, Rachel, and they would be easy for him to make. Although I think Snickers and Marathon would be a bit beyond him, because that's the Mars Corporation in America, I think. It's all their fault. But John, one question, I suppose. Are those government press officers still putting the 5 pledges on the top of the emails they send you?
So the other week, someone pointed out they weren't, although there was one I did get yesterday, I think from Number 10, that did have them back on the top. So whether they were gone and now they're back again, or whether that was just a mistake that was on yesterday, I'm not quite sure. But there's certainly been less talk of them amongst ministers when they're out talking on TV, radio and giving speeches. Yes,
a bit like, an ex you don't really want to keep bringing up in conversation, perhaps. If the government press officers have stopped mentioning it quite so much, then maybe the government is stopping talking about it quite so much as well. We'll have to see, won't we, how it all pans out a bit. Eddie says the King has a duty to protect his subjects. He should have raised his spectre and dissolved Parliament, called an election. Eddie, somebody tried that in a big shiny hat a few hundred years ago, mate. Caused no end of chaos, a lot of paperwork as well, and of course he ended up significantly shorter by the time it was all over. So I don't think Charles III wants to do quite the same thing as Charles I tried. That would probably be a bad move. But anyway, thank you everyone for that. We had a quick little chat there about constitutional monarchies as well, which I wasn't expecting this morning. So get into the comments, everybody. We'll wrap up at the end. What do you think about the King's speech? What would you have liked to have seen in it? Do you think the King should indeed have just dissolved Parliament and said, stop this, so we'll go home, everybody, we've had enough? And do you think that Rishi's given up? The idea that that the government is just sort of treading water, really, waiting for the right exit ramp before they can get out of here. We'll have to wait and see, won't we?